Welcome to this interview with Steve Hackett, brought to you by Make a Difference with Records. In January 2024, we caught up with Steve in London to talk about his brand new album, The Circus and The Nightwhale. Make a Difference with Records is a vinyl charity store based in Godalming. We raise funds for the mental health charity Catalyst. Find out more about us at makeadifferencewithrecords.com. This is part one of two. So my name's Anthony from Make a Difference with Records, and I'm here with Steve Hackett to talk about his brand new album, which comes out on the 16th of February, The Circus and The Nightwhale. So, Steve, an intriguing title, and even more intriguingly, having seen your press release, you say it's a story about you, but with a surreal twist.
Yes.
What's it all about?
Well, it's autobiographical. It starts in 1950. We've got radio from 1950, that very year that I was born. This idea of heteroplaning where a radio is being tuned in and out, that's not a new idea, but I wanted to have a way of framing the album so that everything I did that was typically me to follow was in sharp contrast to the way things were. So it's the way things were and the way things are. It's autobiographical, but then there's also the idea of having a third person, because I like to think that although it's my personal journey, I suspect there are universal themes within it. In other words, we're all born, we all fight like crazy for the things that we need to do and love, and we have our defeats and our triumphs throughout life. But I suspect, quoting a little bit from Joseph Campbell, the idea of hero of 1,000 faces is everybody. Everyone has their heroic quest. It's not just guitar heroes. It's the dinner lady. It's anyone who's dealing with anything. So, yes, it's an autobiographical journey, but it becomes more symbolic as it continues. If it starts literally, it becomes more metaphorical later on, as we wander into areas such as the circus and the Nightwhale, as a sort of a moment of transformation of the darkest hour and coming out of it stronger, and aspects of love that come into it as well. And I like to think that there's a transcendent aspect to it, where I think for everybody they have moments of epiphany and changes and challenges and all of that. So yes, it's me, but we came up with this character Traveller, misspelt deliberately, in order to have a central character which we could hang the narrative on. So yes, it's me, but it's also him, and it's also they, and all of those ideas of singular becoming plural, and much more.
So the elements of surrealism that you talk about, and the fact that you've chosen this character Traveller, was that because you wanted part of it to be kind of more of a magical journey than just a factual recount of history, or were there some bits about your own life that you weren't quite ready to share completely?
Well, I wanted it to be faction and fiction, so I wanted to have artistic license with it, certainly. There are certain things that are difficult to address too literally, so I wanted to generalise at times, particularly some of the challenges that were really difficult, and I didn't want to just bitch away. There's no point doing that. I wanted to be constructive throughout the whole thing. So, absolutely right, and I like to think that it becomes more magical as it continues. So I'd say by the time we're hitting possibly the fourth track. You know, it's starting to head more into a surreal kind of area where I'm being less literal and things are getting jumbled up I hope a nicely poetic way for people.
So you mentioned that this is a story that you've wanted to tell for some time. People might look at that comment and say, well, hang on a minute. Not long ago, Steve brought out the autobiography, A Genesis in My Bed. What did you mean by needing to tell that story now?
Well, I think music tells a different story than a book. Yep, I covered as much as I could think of with the book at the time, but um, if I want to communicate with somebody emotionally, I would go to music straight away. I'm a far better musician than I am orator. So and writer, and the guitar does tend to lead me into these various places that I want to be able to be revealing and wear my heart on my sleeve and all of that. At the same time, you know, there's aspects of being, you know, one half a would-be classical player and another half a would-be shredder, and so you get all these contradictions. But it feels like a closing of a of a circle for me. Um, I felt something was achieved with this that perhaps I hadn't quite before, and I think it's got to do with framing the music and capitulating to the idea of all the things that at one time DJs used to say, "Oh, I hate it when one song segues into another." And I thought, well, yeah, but I'm beyond the years when DJs are even remotely interested in what I do. If there's a following, and it is there, it's because people like myself have built it in a certain way where we've thought, no, actually, long form was what it was all about. So all those albums of a certain time from the 1970s, where people were allowed to do tracks that were half an hour long, um, I thought, in a way, yeah, that shows that the music's grown up in a way. So yeah, we can you can borrow from concerto, you can borrow from epic poems, you can borrow from Coronation Street. That goes a long way enough. So there's a whole album that runs pretty much continuously, and I think it's all the better for it. And this idea of a film for the ear rather than the eye is something that it had occurred to me listening to certain people's tracks when they really, really worked in rock and roll, where you've got strong imagery coming off the music, long before videos were really dreamt up, and before that started to sort of lead the charge in the 1980s. It was music that had standout imagery. You know, they may have been protest songs, they may have been um, they could have been songs of war. They could have been songs about anything. But um, music, music has got that ability. So
I mean, Steve, the way you describe it, it almost sounds like it was a bit of a cathartic experience for you as much as anything, getting it into a musical form. Is that fair?
I think it is. And when I first started listening back to it, I thought to myself, I've been too revealing here. You know, there's love songs. Proggers don't like love songs. They can deal with any amount of war and difficult time signatures. But how about an honest love song? So you know that may be uncomfortable for the the mainly male audience, but there are women in that audience too, and it's not just the sole denizen of guys of a certain age. It isn't that. So I thought, yeah, let's be revealing, let's be honest. Um, Listening to McCartney, who I met once, um, talking about love songs that that had never really let him down. You know, it had always worked. Now, obviously, the goalposts have shifted enormously since the days when we were young kids listening to the Beatles. But somehow the idea of being brave and quoting Anthony Hopkins at one point was saying, "Be brave and mighty forces will come to your aid."
Yeah.
I do believe in that. So always go for a risk. Always try it. You know, the very thing that you're resisting. You think, oh, it might work, but it might not. People might not like it. Yeah, all the nudges. No,
But Steve,
follow through.
in a sense, I mean, it is your story, so it is personal to you, and therefore, you know, when you talk about taking those risks, that makes a lot of sense. But just picking up what you said a minute ago, you say proggers don't like love songs. Well, I think my own view on that is, well, I think it depends on the style more than whether it's a love song. So, for example, one of the most loved songs played live of any Genesis era is Afterglow,
Yes,
which is a
yes,
beautiful, it's a very tragic love song, but it is a love
yes.
song. So
Yeah.
maybe it's the stylistic issue rather than the fact it's a love song.
Well observed, and I think that Afterglow is one of my favourite songs. Um, I think it's a beautiful song. There's an aspect of the Beatles in there once again, but you know, I think the idea of wind and wuthering, and the idea again of the hero and lost love, all of that. Um, yeah, there's something, there's wonderful. You know, it's part of the quest, isn't it? At the end of the day, unless you do decide to become that hermit for life and on, and there are many people who are uncomfortable with that. But I know that I need a partner, and I'm lucky to have Jo, my wife.
So, Steve, you've referred a couple of times to this being an heroic quest, but the way you talk, I don't think you're talking about Hercules or Agamemnon or anything. You're talking about people in their own individual lives overcoming particular adversities. What was the main part of your heroic quest that you had to overcome?
Oh, that's extraordinary, really. Well, I think that the difficulty for me was that I met Jo, my wife. We work together very closely. First of all, we were due to work together. She was making films and she wanted somebody to do some film music. Of course, if I said one thing led to another, ha ha, we've continued that in the face of opposition initially. It was very difficult for me to establish, for us to become established as a couple, and also for me to realize that I desperately needed her in order to be able to function. You know, as a as a musician, I was practically ground to a halt at times, doing very little touring, and when I was touring, it was just acoustic stuff. And I knew that I could do greater things. I could, you know, reclaim the streets. As a favourite phrase of Nick Beggs, provided I was prepared to work hard with someone who was behind me all the way, and often she would be leading the charge. But it took many years for us to become established as a couple, and to be accepted as such.
So your own quest was really making that happen and realizing that dream that you could see, but at that point couldn't realize.
Yes, absolutely. There came a moment of realization, and it was a very slow process for me. At times, you know, I'm a very slow boy. Anyone who thinks I'm brilliant, think again. I'm very slow to come to conclusions that others may understand straight away. I mean, my grandmother, God rest her soul, no longer with us, knew that Jo was right for me, and said, "You're wasting your lives if you're not together full time." And of course, you know, there were challenges of the previous life without going into too
Yeah.
much detail of what that was all about. And I knew I had to make that leap of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think for a child, it may be very obvious about what's right and wrong because your parents are telling you that's right and that's wrong, blah, 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 blah. And you've got all the commandments, and all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But, there comes a moment when, and I think it was, funnily enough, it was Joe's sister who said to me, I think everyone has got a right to be happy. And at that point when I was talking to her, I was literally in tears, not able to cope with, there was a life that uh, I could no longer sustain that. I just couldn't. And I realized that I had to deal with my own issues of guilt and outworn things and look at the evidence that was right in front of my eyes and go, no, this is important. This is important for her. It's important for me. We belong together. We're meant to be. This is something that was a slow dawning. I already loved her, but I realised that there was a much deeper
Mm-hmm.
meaning to this, a deeper love that was just around the corner.
So, of course, this part of the story, Steve, you've touched on a previous album, Held in the Shadows. Was this kind of taking that and taking it to one stage further then?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Taking it to one stage further and admitting weakness and various things. And the line right at the end of Ghost Moon and Living Love is, hold on, my love, I'll find a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, this is a far cry from Epping Forest and Punch-Ups and all the rest of the prog stalwarts.
Well, shall we just have a quick canter through the album, because
Sure.
I've been lucky enough. You let me have a sneak preview of it, and I've had a few listens to it. And the one thing that struck me was that it's a real emotional roller coaster, both lyrically and musically. So, as you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, we start back in 1950, post-war, a nice little snippet of "Listen with Mother" to make sure we all know what era we're in.
Yes.
And the story then kind of weaves into this young boy who perhaps gets led astray by someone who's not a nice character, young love. And then we get to the circus,
Yes.
which rather sounds and feels like it's your kind of musical birth, if I can call it that, and entering Genesis and everything like that.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit more about that circus and what you meant by that.
Okay. The circus really represents, for me, things that are slightly out of control. The idea of just being able to stay on the horse. Yes, I'm a musician. Yes, I can play. I can do all of that. But there will be controlling forces that will be there to unseat you, obstacles that need to be overcome. And even though I think that Genesis was arguably the best band in the world, it started to become very controlling, and I was being forbidden from doing further solo work after the success, fortunate or unfortunate, of Voyage of the Acolyte, my first effort. And that was lovely, of course, to be able to work with my brother and John Aycock, who's no longer with us on this earth, but a great friend and very sweet and very, very supportive, and wonderful to have that team. And also lovely to work with Phil and Mike as a rhythm section, to be able to call on that. I really didn't know any other drummers and bass players at that time of that standard. But the circus is really that, and then there are other times in my personal life where things became equally controlling, and I realised again I had to break free from that. There are times it's a bit like The Prisoner. If anyone watches that old thing, I'm not a number, I'm a free man. There's moments when you're going, hold on a minute, I fought like hell to make Genesis an international success. I sweated blood to make that happen. I said some very unpopular things in order to make it stronger. I had no diplomacy as a young guy whatsoever, and I suspect they had the same thing, that they just shot from the hip, and one or two of them still do. But at the end of the day, I think it was a brilliant team.
Yes.
A brilliant team, because I think the only other band that really rivals Genesis in terms of having a collection of writers on that scale is basically the Beatles, who had three brilliant writers. Mm-hmm. Eventually, that band had three brilliant writers, with a brilliant producer, of course. So yes, okay, four-man team. Let's just say at times I think of George Martin as Beatles number 5 and 6.
Yes.
Without that, without the ability to be able to, you want to use an orchestra? Here's an orchestra. Yes, do an arrangement on the back of an envelope, etc. Mm. Oh, you want indie musicians? Yeah. Boom, 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 boom. And of course they had the world's ear and all the rest. But I digress. Let's not talk about the Beatles and what great fans all of Genesis were. That I mean, I think that the gauntlet was firmly laid down in a way, or thrown down by the Beatles to say, well, this is it. And Genesis, John Lennon, years later gave an interview, one praising the band. In one interview, he said he thought that Genesis were true sons of the Beatles.
Yes.
True sons of the Beatles. Now, praise doesn't come any higher there. I think that the difficulty for Genesis is that whereas the Beatles grew up in fairly working class conditions, mm-hmm. I think private school education that drives people to extraordinary success, etc., also makes people very, very competitive. And I think this is basically why people say, oh, why isn't there a Genesis today? Why is that not possible? I think it's because there's that edge of competitiveness, and the power play that's part of every band, of course. So you can't say that Genesis are singled out for special treatment here, but it was a great blow when Peter Gabriel left the band. I thought of Pete as a friend. He's the guy who got me into the band in the first place, guy who gave me a chance. This was a big deal. I think for Genesis, yes, it did manage to sustain it, but and as a 4-piece, and later on as a 3-piece. But I think the golden period of Genesis for me is Foxtrot and Selling England by the Pound. If you take 2 albums where there's not one single weak track, there's no padding on either of those 2 albums, and that's my own take on it. Mm-hmm. I know that there are others that agree with me. Of course, there's a vested interest if you decide to carry on with the band name and just do all sorts of things, post Gabriel, post me, etc., and have enormous success commercially. No one can argue with that, and no one would take that away from them. But if I look at the whole of it, and in a very uncompetitive kind of way, I would say, yes, it was at its strongest as a 5-man team where you've got everyone pitching in ideas.
I mean, I guess your point of view as a Genesis fan very much depends to some extent upon when you first discovered the band. So my first venture into Genesis material was as a schoolboy, hearing Trick of the Tail and Winter Wuthering. So those have a special place in my heart. But I think most people would agree with that there is this golden period. I'd probably take a step back and say Nursery Crime onwards rather than Foxtrot onwards, to the point where you left the band. But you talk about it as the circus, and of course, looking at the lyrics, there's the excitement of the circus as well as the controlling element of the circus. So there was almost a price to be paid for that ability to grow and express yourself as a musician and to have done the things that you did with the band.
Yes, I think that when I joined Genesis, I guess it was pretty much like George Harrison's situation with the Beatles. He was always going to be the junior member, the new boy, and you didn't go to the school and blah 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 blah. So Phil and I were the new boys then. I know it seems laughable now. We're men in our 70s, but. Um, I was thrilled to be a part of Genesis. I thought, oh, here we go. Finally, it's a really professional band. We're doing gigs. In the first 6 months, I managed to acquire a Les Paul. We got a Mellotron off of King Crimson, courtesy of Robert, getting rid of, because he had too many. So, yeah, King Crimson's cast-offs. But that produced tracks such as Fountain of Salmacis. I mean, beautiful string writing, beautiful orchestral arrangements from the fingertips of the very talented young Mr. Banks. And I wanted to encourage all of that. That was what it was all about for me. That the idea that a band can turn on a dime. It can one minute be, it can be a pop group. It can be a folk ensemble. It can be jazz. Is a four-letter word, of course, isn't it? But there are aspects in there, the big band stuff, the accented stuff, all of that, the things that we used to call a push at the beginning of a bar, an accent.
So we've talked about the fact that ultimately it became more and more restrictive in the band, and you had to find your way out to pursue your solo ambitions. Hence the aptly named track "Get Me Out." "Get Me Out" sounds like a really quite sort of painful aspect, because the phrase you used was public celebration but private negation. What did you mean by private negation?
I'm wondering. I think that refers to an aspect of Genesis where, from time to time, um, there may be a public criticism of something and a private congratulation. It's all part of the complex, competitive world of Genesis politics. It's very odd, and I don't want to disparage the guys because, as I said, I think that's partly due to an education that you have to remember, but that when they were at Charterhouse in the 1960s, yes, people think, oh, privileged public school, etc. But they weren't being designed to be rock and rollers. They were being designed to become the next viceroy of India. And how come we lost the colonies? And you will be a captain of industry at all cost, or end up in a mental institution. Um, so I think that's what I'm on about. Get Me Out was at the point where I think it's possibly the album at its angriest, to be honest. It's almost a kind of, there's a grotesque aspect to it, almost a dance of death. It's a kind of waltz. It's bluesy. It's all out guitar.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sound at the beginning is lots of things stacked, but with a guitar edge to it, so that it's a larger than life guitar coming at you. I think that happens to sound brilliant, if I may say so. Largely due to Roger King's efforts here, understanding what I was trying to get to, and adding things that I would think, oh, I wouldn't have put that with it. But by the time things were stacked and things were heavily tracked on the opening riff, it's set up and listen time. It's angular. It's angry. It's a bit frightening, frankly. I wouldn't want to play that to the children.
So we, as you say, it is an angry, threatening almost song, and then we go straight from that into this most beautiful love song, "The Ghost Moon" and "Living
Living Love.
Love." And I think at this point we're getting more perhaps into your personal life again, and your heroic quest that you referenced earlier, and getting to the point where you and Joe can be who you want
Yeah.
to be together. Where did the inspiration for that particular track come from? Was that musically driven or lyrically driven?
Well, funnily enough, we were in Greece, in Naplion, when we were looking at the moon one day down by the water. Beautiful, sleepy town, lovely to recharge batteries, only for a few days because we only ever get away for a few days
Yeah.
because everything is so busy all the time. And it's one of those moments, it's daytime, but you're looking up and you're seeing the moon, but it's very, very pale, it's hardly there. And Joe was saying, it, or was it me? I don't know. Sometimes she'll say it and sometimes I'll say it. Anyway, we came up with the title between us. It was Ghost Moon and Living Love, talking about ourselves. And it was at a point where we were just out on a little sort of pier, a stone pier. And she said, you know, when I was first here, it was with my father many years ago, and he'd taken her there when she was very young. I think she was about 13 or 14. And he said, oh, you know, in a few years when you've grown up and with your love, you won't want your old dad to be here. And Jo has always been very, very fond of her father. He was a lovely guy, a wonderful musician and teacher and all sorts of things. And I think that was a bittersweet memory because he died very young when she was only 20.
Oh, right.
And he was in his early 50s.
Yeah.
He went far too soon.
Yes.
And was a huge figure in her life who led her to, oh, well, I mean, just everything. When you've got a great parent, and I've been lucky to have great parents too, and the effect of my father, who I miss greatly. But that's really it. So, yes, it was a very personal song. It was taking shape in bits, and I was letting it go further on. And I always had this idea, it might not sound like much, but when we were in Paris many years ago, gorgeous sunshine, and there were a few guys playing guitars out by Montmartre, and I said to her, "There's something about guitars in the sun, isn't there? You know, it doesn't have to be played to a virtuoso standard. It's just the sunshine and strumming guitars and people just sitting around, just being themselves." And I thought, I must get that into a lyric one day because it's part of that. So yes, there's something there, and I think the song became more and more revealing as it continued. It wasn't written all in one go, but
I mean, it's a really, really beautiful love song, both lyrically and musically, really very much in harmony on that particular track. But then you flip back to the dark side again. We're back to the Circo Inferno,
yes.
which we've talked about. And then we get to almost the climax of the album, really, which is the Into the Nightwhale track. Let's talk a bit about that. I mean, first of all, where did the idea of a night whale come from? I mean, what exactly is a night whale?
Well, we've been kicking around the idea of circus titles, and I thought that, you know, there had been a lot of circus titles that people have used. And Joe came up with the idea of night whale, the idea of something where it's the dark night of the soul. It's where you're having to face your demons at the darkest moment, and you realise that it could go either way. Either you get finished off by this, and you get swallowed up,
Yeah.
and you come out barely living at the end of it, an alcoholic, God knows what, or it strengthens you. So there's a kind of rebirth. It's a sort of metaphorical one where I do feel that I'm born again through this experience. So if anyone thinks that I've improved, there's a reason for it. It's because I'm not on my own here. You know, I got this wonderful lady who is so self-effacing and so generous with her time. I've never seen anyone work like her. Everyone thinks that, oh, Steve dreamt it all up, it all comes from him. Well, actually, you know, we wrote this stuff together. It's built out of conversation, out of living out of our travels. Jo's taken me to many places on earth that I wouldn't have thought of. I've taken her on the touring map for rock and rollers is well known. You can play this country, you can play that one, you can even do Russia occasionally, or you could at one time, and we did. But the idea of her saying, yes, I'm going to take you to India, I'm going to take you to China, I'm going to take you to Africa, to Ethiopia, to Botswana on safari. You're going to do this, all the dangerous places, it's broadened me. The education, and there's normally a sort of a stay-at-home aspect. I'll be thinking, yes, well, we could be having tea and scones down Devon way, couldn't we? And that'll be nice and easy. I'll just drive down there and back. And no. What you need to go and see is the smoke that thunders, Victoria Falls. You need to go and see. You need to meet the tribes in Ethiopia, and we did, and it was transformative.
Yes.
All of this, because these are things that you won't get out of a textbook. You won't get it out of school. You won't even get it out of a university education. You have to meet people. You have to go there. You have to get involved. And it's no good saying, yes, but I'm a shy person. I couldn't possibly do all of that. Well, I do think of myself still as the shy young kid with glasses, the failed footballer. If you aren't good at ball games when you're a kid, your young life is ruined. So you're a failure as a child, but that leaves room to do something else when you're an adult. Mm. So we addressed some childhood themes in the album, and the things that I'm talking about, facing darkest fears and making that leap of faith, doing all of that, the all at sea aspect of,
yes,
I was ricocheting around not knowing whether I was coming or going once or twice, and I would never admit to having had a nervous breakdown, but at one point I was literally on a bed shaking like this, and I thought, I've just got to get a grip, and I'm not. And it's being able to see your way to a constructive future without thinking, I am cracking up. I just cannot go public with this. I've just got to write this myself, and hopefully music,
yes,
will be cathartic in itself. Put it into music, put it into a song, try and describe it, whether they're the most, wonderful, loving feelings and being surrounded by the magic of the earth that I've seen, or whether it's, something that's a real threat and real tragedy.
That was part one of a two-part interview with Steve Hackett, brought to you by Make a Difference with Records, also available as an audio podcast. Our thanks go to Jo and Steve Hackett for being so generous with their time.